Happy to bring in Stephen Brooks, part of Spartan Tailgate, who covers Michigan State for 24/7 Sports and our great network. And Illinois taking on the Spartans, second time in 3 years. The Spartans are coming here to Illinois in November. Could be a windy day, a cold day. That's kind of the way they do things here, Stephen, in November. But how are you, man? And thanks for joining us.
I'm doing well. That's exactly how I remember Champaign from the last time. So I'm looking forward to being back.
Yeah. Well, take
I
me in
remember
a
my
little bit.
rental car rocking. I had like a sort of like a Toyota 4Runner-ish, small SUV type of thing. I parked and we're just swaying and swaying. It was almost like a little fair ride. It was a good time.
Yeah, Bielema was worried about that wind. The last I saw was like 10 mile an hour consistently. But we know in this stadium, it can gust to 30, 40 miles an hour. Hopefully not as bad as it was 2 years ago. But that was a bad game for Illinois because they were rolling, and Michigan State, which wasn't rolling at that time, took care of them and kind of changed Illinois' season. So Illinois, again, trying to end the season well. But let's learn more about Michigan State here, Stephen, with a first-year coach, Jonathan Smith, West Coast guy, great success at Oregon State, especially given their history of struggles. But, it comes into the Big Ten in quite a bit of a mess of a program after what happened there under Mel Tucker to end. So what have you seen from Jonathan Smith in his first year leading that program?
Yeah, it's been interesting, because like everything he does is notable, at least, obviously putting his touches on it. You mentioned the mess. Like, it wasn't your normal, like, coach firing. Like, this program had 2 months, more than that, really, just sort of flapping in the breeze there. No direction, no purpose, really. I mean, and then the results, were what they were. And the kids, they fought fairly hard for the most part and whatever. But it wasn't just like end of season. There's like a couple weeks of dishevelment. Like, it was 2+ months. Mel Tucker was suspended on, I think, September 10th and then fired about a month later officially. So it was a long, drawn-out thing. And I say that just to say, of course, a lot of kids did leave and moved on and whatever, which is natural with a coaching change. But those who stayed, like, really didn't have a good time last year, obviously. And so you had that piece of the roster. Then, of course, Smith and his guys had to go get a whole bunch of transfers to fill everything out. And then, of course, the freshman class. The whole deal, by the end of the spring, you're talking about 61 new players. So one of the first things he really put an emphasis on was team building, culture, connectivity, getting his locker room tight. I mean, if you're going to bring 61 new players to a fight, those guys got to have each other's back, obviously, So I thought that was a good move. And I thought we saw that pay off early on. Florida Atlantic, for example, they got to get 3 stops. They're up 6. They got to get 3 stops in the fourth quarter to preserve that lead. Obviously Florida Atlantic could have taken the lead on any of those possessions, and they did it. Not a Herculean achievement, but there was some adversity, and they responded. Maryland the next week, they're down a touchdown 3 separate times, came back each time and won the game on the road. So I thought that, like, they showed some resiliency and some grit, and I think you can tie that back to some of those things that he was doing early. And then, the schedule got harder, and this was never a team built to compete necessarily or anything. So I don't want to ramble and take up too much time. Let me know which way you want to go with it, but it's been interesting. I mean, these guys are new to the Midwest, mostly. A couple coaches have some ties here, and there's one holdover, Courtney Hawkins, a receiver coach from the previous staff. But that's really an interesting piece, especially as we move toward this part of the year with signing day coming up. I think that's a big question about him. I think people think he's a good coach. I think they like sort of the culture he's instilled and everything. There's a lot of Mark Antonio to him. They're not the same guy, but there's a lot of traits there that you can see some similarities. I think that has people on board. I think the biggest thing for people, though, when you hear from fans is just, are they going to recruit well enough? Are they going to get enough good players to develop and retain? Obviously is the bigger key now, because that was such a big part of what he did at Oregon State, was developing over a long track. And we're going to find out, but I'm just not sure. I don't mean this either way, but we're just not sure if that plan can work in 2024.
For sure. And that's where Illinois is at. It's like, hey, you got some stability, you got a good coach. Now, can you get the talent that is necessary to win in this league at a high level? They do have a talented quarterback. Aidan Chiles follows Jonathan Smith from Oregon State, former top 100 prospect, the number 2 quarterback transfer according to 24/7 Sports. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Juice Williams in his freshman year. You see these signs of unbelievable talent, and then you see the signs of a young quarterback. Just take me through what you've seen from Aidan Chiles and how he's developed through the season.
Yeah, like, it's roller coaster is cliche, but like it fits here because it's thrilling at times, and then sometimes you might end up puking on your stomach. Like it's both in every extreme. So he is extremely talented. we're up late at covering these games and stuff. So I ended up seeing a lot of Oregon State last year, and they would put him in for a couple drives a game. And I'm like, man, that kid's got something to him. And then he follows him over here, and they kind of anoint him from day one. I mean, he was named the starter right away. There was no real competition. They brought in a veteran backup from the FCS, but he's been the guy all the whole way. And speaking of Jonathan Smith, like Smith's so low key and isn't really about the self promotion and stuff like that. That Chiles has almost supplanted him as the face of the program for 11, 12 months here since the turnover. So I say that to say I think early on he was trying to be the man, capitalized the man early on right away. And I think he was pressing. I think he's had to adjust to a different kind of supporting cast. He had 4 all-conference O-linemen out there. He had Damian Martinez at running back, who's at Miami now. He had 2 good receivers with him out there. And he wasn't facing the game pressure of playing every snap. He could kind of do his thing and then just go hang out on the bench with a baseball cap type of deal. So I think there was definitely some early adjustments there in terms of every snap is living and dying with you. There's real consequences, to these things. And just sort of trying to grow into it. Again, I say that face of the program thing, like the fan base rallied around him. Like the hype was considerable, and 24/7 Sports played a part in that. We made him our number 2 transfer quarterback. So the hype was palpable. And I think he wanted to be that right away. And it just wasn't there for him. He was still a first-time starter. He came in the season at 18 years old, too, as a younger guy for his grade. Has since turned 19. But so there were some growing pains. Turnovers have been the consistent thing, though. He's basically good for 1 a game. I think he's got 14 on the year when you add in his fumbles. I think it's 11 picks, 3 fumbles, I want to say. It's right around there if I'm wrong. Might be off by 1 or 2, but he's a little careless with the ball, and I think that's been part of that learning process of valuing possessions and things. Some of them have just been bad throws. Sometimes he's misreading the coverage. Sometimes have just been good plays. It's been a little bit of everything. It hasn't been one consistent thing with him in the turnovers. So that's kind of the downside. He makes plays that will lose you games, but then he'll make plays that win you games. He does give them an explosive element. He can flick that thing 40, 50 yards in the air. He has a big arm, big frame. He looks the part. He looks like a guy like, okay, you could see playing on Sundays. Skill set is there. Like I said, just some decision-making stuff sometimes. He is mobile. He's not a runner. He's not going to run up 100 yards on you, but like 3rd and 10, you turn your back in man coverage, he's going to make you pay, that type of thing. They have increased his usage in the run game a little bit more as the season's gone on. That's because they can't really run it the traditional way very often, or at least consistently. So that's kind of the thing there. It's kind of boom or bust. Like I said, at this point, MSU folks, like, have just expected that the turnover is going to come at some point, and you hope you can kind of absorb it. Sometimes they have, most times they haven't, and most times it's more than one. Yeah. So that's kind of been the trick with him. But when he's on, it's like a drive. He'll have a great drive, and then maybe they punt 2 times in a row, and things kind of fall apart. There's not a lot of consistency between drives when you look at this season. But when he's on, it's beautiful stuff. He throws a great ball, and you can see like why you could project him as a pro. But the inconsistencies are an issue right now.
Sounds a lot like what we saw from Luke Altmaier last year. That's why I would expect Aidan Chiles, as this thing goes along, to be a really good thing for Michigan State. But you mentioned it, the supporting cast. It's not like Kenneth Walker is back there, right? But I know Nick Marsh, their wide receiver, Cory Parker, the Illinois defensive backs coach, coached him in high school at River Rouge there in Detroit. But what's he got? What's Chiles got around him in that offense?
Yeah, Marsh is definitely the one, and he's obviously he came in. He was the most talented right away. He was our only 4-star kid. He's 6'3", 210-ish pounds, big-bodied guy, but can play all over the field. He's great at deep balls and catching that 50-50 stuff, but they'll throw it to him underneath. They'll throw now screens to him and everything. He'll do it all. And I just didn't know how much you could rely on a freshman, even somebody with his traits and pedigree. He's also young for his grade. He turned 18. He came into the season at 17, turned 18 mid-season.
Yeah, the Michigan State offense relying on teenagers, right?
Right. And so he hasn't hit that freshman wall yet, though. Maybe, there's still time, I guess. But I kind of, it just happens to most guys. And he really hasn't. So his usage has gone up. Him and Chiles have a great rapport. He trusts him. He definitely recognizes, he's his bailout guy. He's the most talented guy. So that's that. Otherwise, you're kind of talking about just an okay group of skill guys. Montori Foster and Jerron Glover are sort of complementary guys. I say they make the plays that are there, but they're not like game breakers. They're not guys you really got to scheme around. They'll catch the open pass, maybe make a guy miss, but they're not super dangerous. The running backs, I would say, are kind of the same way. It's a 2-man deal with Nate Carter and K'Ron Lynch Adams. They're both kind of they're way more similar than different, which was interesting to me because Lynch Adams they brought in as a transfer from UMass. I would think that maybe they want to get a little more of a complementary style, but they're kind of the same back. They're smaller but strong, compact build, but muscular, quick, get their feet going quickly and get up to speed quickly. Not burners speed wide, but quick in a short area. So they're decent. They're reliable. They're middle of the road, Big Ten type of backs, I'd say. At tight end, they got Jack Velling, who's one of the 3 starters who came over from Oregon State. And he had 8 touchdowns last year. A lot of them were in the red zone. But this is such a tight end heavy offense. They almost have 2 on the field at all times. They target them. They use the tight end a ton. And he just really hasn't got going this year. He's played a ton of snaps. He's on the field all the time. I thought he'd have more of one of those like 40 catch, 700 yards, 5 touchdown type of seasons. He's not even close to that. So I still think he's capable, of having like a 100-yard game on any given night, but it hasn't come together consistently for him. And then the offensive line is just a problem. It's a bottom tier line in the Big Ten. We can talk more about it a little bit, but they're not able to run the ball consistently on good teams, and even against the bad teams, they're just kind of pedestrian at best. And then the concerning part is lately, this last half of the season, they're not protecting Chiles as well either. At least early on, they were a decent pass blocking group. They just couldn't run the ball. Now they can't really do both. So that's been a bit of an issue, and I think that's had a lot to do with Chiles' development. He has taken steps. I don't want to act like he hasn't grown. He definitely has. You kind of got to squint, and there's small steps, but they're there. But I think it's taken him a bit to understand what he's working with up front and how to navigate that, and just sort of what he has to do, to be successful with a line like this.
Yeah, one example of Illinois or Michigan State's offensive line, like Illinois got Kevin Wigginton out of the transfer portal. He started 6 games for Michigan State last year, and he's like the 8th lineman at Illinois. And Illinois' offensive line isn't great. So, they've struggled a little bit, especially that right side seems to be giving up a lot of pressure.
Yeah, it's been a weakness for basically since the college football playoff team in 2015. To be honest, 2017 they won 10 games. They were pretty good there. Still had one of the Allen brothers from Illinois. They had Brian, who ended up becoming a pro. That one was decent. 21 with Walker. He masked some things. They were still decent up there. They had one guy end up getting drafted off that line. I'm sorry, 2 actually, one later on. But for the better part of a decade, it's been the program's weakness. And they know it. It's just I thought they could have done a little more. Now it's hard. It's hard to get contributors out of the portal up front. It just is. But I think there's probably more they could have done. They brought in Tanner Miller from Oregon State, their center. So he's the 3rd starter that I mentioned that followed him across. He's probably been their best. Luke Newman is a transfer from Holy Cross, Michigan kid who came back, has played left guard all year. He's been solid. But otherwise, it's just it hasn't really been good. There's not a lot of depth. There's not a lot of talent. And like I said, they haven't been able to run the ball with any consistency. And if you watch these guys at Oregon State, they were so balanced, and it's so critical to the play action game and the bootlegs and all the stuff they want to do. You have to be able to run the ball to run this offense. And they've been behind the sticks, and even just their basic bread and butter plays, especially early in the season, you couldn't count on them to get you just the basic 3 yards, and keep you on schedule. So that's been a big issue. Now, I will say really quickly, they came out of the first bye week, and that's what I think makes this game really interesting. They came out of the first bye week and outrushed Iowa. And obviously the defense played really well to do their part there, but they bottled up Caleb Johnson. Only had one 75-yard touchdown, had like 23 yards besides that, and like 18 carries or something. But they come out and ran the ball as well as we've seen all season. Like not just okay, they pretty dang good, above average for sure. And it's like, where did this team come from? It's the same line, same guys, same operation. They just came out of the bye week, with pixie dust or whatever it was, and played way above their heads. And carried that through the next week to Michigan. We're like, what happened here? It went from very poor to, like I said, above average, like that, coming out of the bye week. And then it kind of fell off again against Indiana. So you're coming out of a bye week again. Do they have some sort of another magic potion stored up to punch above their weight there? I don't know. But it was really interesting to see. I can't really recall ever seeing something like that where a unit had underperformed pretty consistently all year, and then coming out of a bye week against solid teams. Michigan and Iowa are solid. I'm not going to put them in the elite category, but you came out and ran it as well as you have against those defenses. It didn't make sense. So I'm curious to see if there's another spark they can find or something to regain that down the stretch.
Yeah, because Illinois' run defense hasn't been very good so far this year, so it'll be interesting to watch. All right, 3 of their last 5 games, and 3 of they've lost 5 of 6 here. 3 of those are the top 10 teams: Ohio State, Oregon, and Indiana. The other one, Michigan, here recently. But defensively, they've struggled, right? So what have been the issues on that side of the ball? But there are some bright spots, it seems like, especially the cornerback Brantley. So what do you see out of that Michigan State defense?
Yeah, the one thing that they've proved to us early and that's held fairly consistent is they're pretty good against the run. It's not like, and statistically, maybe it doesn't look that way, but like down to down, not a lot of teams just line up and just push them around. You can break one on them, of course, or get a seal and pop something. But like, other than really Oregon, even Ohio State, like wasn't just mauling them and getting big gains consistently on the ground. They popped a couple. Oregon did. Oregon just kind of whooped them, in every facet. But other than that, they've been pretty good against the run.
We've seen Oregon do that to a team too.
Yeah, they're really good. So they are pretty good against the run, I will say. That's kind of their identity. They're built that way. Yeah, like they don't have much of a pass rush at all, right? Like they haven't had a sack, I think, since Boston College in September. They have 1 sack in Big Ten play. I think they have 15 sacks total, and 7 came in the Florida Atlantic game in game 1. So even that's kind of skewed. Pass rush just toothless. But they're good at playing the run. They'll rotate numbers in on the D line. They'll play like 8, 9, 10 D linemen consistently, just reload. And all those guys have talked all season about how much fresher they feel in the fourth quarter. So I don't think the talent level's super high. I don't see an NFL guy on the D line, but when they're rotating those guys and keeping the snap counts low, that's how they're able to be effective. And again, they're better at clogging things up than they are at rushing the passer. Linebackers are the same thing. They're more Big Ten throwback linebackers where they just want to come down, fill an A gap, fill a B gap, that type of thing. But you can throw on them. Jordan Turner is a guy to know there as a transfer from Wisconsin. He's been their best playmaker, forced a couple turnovers, again, plays the run really well. So they do that. The pass defense, I don't know how to accurately critique because of that pass rush, right? They don't even have sort of a decent one complimenting them. Charles Brantley, as you mentioned, has had his best year by far. He's played a lot of football by now. He's always been undersized. I mean, he's probably – I doubt he's 170, maybe. He's a little guy, but he's figured out how to play with those disadvantages. And at this point, he's played a ton of snaps, having a really good year. Got banged up in the last game, but they're hopeful he can be back this week. They've been banged up throughout the secondary, actually. Malik Spencer, another starting safety, got hurt last week. TBD on him. Dylan Tatum's a guy that got hurt in game 1 that would be in the rotation if not starting. So they've been a little bit thin back there. I think they've been okay. I don't think they've just been assaulted, in the passing game the way they have been for most of Mel Tucker's time. But like I said, it's hard to know exactly how bad or how good they are without having that pass rush component to really compliment them there. But I don't think they've been poor. That's definitely the way you want to attack them. You don't just want to line up and run it 40 times. So it's the weaker end of it. I don't think it's like a massive glaring weakness, though. I don't think they've gotten burned a ton of times, with the deep shots and things like that.
I think Illinois and Michigan State got to come out of this bye looking at the final 3 games like, man, we can win everyone, but there's also the possibility if we play our poor ball, like we could end the season pretty poorly. So how do they look at this game? Because after this, it's Purdue at home, right? And Rutgers at home. So what do you think of this game means for Michigan State in its 2024 season?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they look, they've talked all week. I just came back from interviews and, they're only looking at this game, but human nature, I'm sure they're seeing it as a 3-game stretch that they want to go 3-0. I mean, they definitely want to get to a bowl game. That they've only done that once since Mark D'Antonio retired, the Peach Bowl with Kenneth Walker and all that. So they definitely want to do that. That would be a good marker. That would be meeting expectations, really. Anybody who is reasonable, which, that's an interesting term, but reasonable people, I think, had them as about a 6-6 team. They said just get to a bowl game in year 1 and sort of build off that. I think that would be mission accomplished. And so, yeah, I think they look at it as 3 winnable games. I think they see themselves as better than what they are. They took a 10-0 lead on Indiana. That was, and they ended up getting their doors blown off after that. But nobody had taken a lead on Indiana. So I think within some of these games, they've shown some things. I mean, they had they had 5 straight red zone drives against Ohio State to open the game. Only scored on 1. So you get even 3 of those. You're talking about maybe at least a different half a different feel. They're going to lose the game probably regardless, but there's been moments. Oregon, again, was just kind of a obliteration. So not much to draw from that one. They definitely think they should have beat Boston College. Had the ball on the other side of the 50 with under a minute to go. I think they had 2 timeouts, and Chiles just sort of forced a deep one and got picked off and ended it. But I say all that to say, like, they definitely think that they should have a couple more wins. They've seen how they have competed against some of these better teams, and we all know how athletes are a little irrational, about their own abilities at times. So I think they definitely believe that they can go 3-0 through this stretch, and I think that's kind of the mentality in the program right now.
So to wrap it up here, Stephen, what do you think are the keys to Spartans pulling it off and kind of, giving Illinois another bad November loss here?
Yeah, I'm very curious to see what this staff comes up with again out of a bye week. I mean, what they did the last time, I've really never seen, in terms of how much impact a bye had immediately the very next day. They did do some small schematic changes, like putting Chiles in the shotgun, which, of course, opens up the threat of the run game and read option stuff. You can't do that under center. Things like that. They did sprinkle in a little more RPO, just some small things. So I'm wondering, in some other, plays that we hadn't seen before, unscouted look type of stuff, I want to see what that looks like and if there's a little more of that. But keys, they have to be who they've been against the run. They cannot allow Illinois to find some traction there and just really beat them that way. Make them beat you throwing the ball, and they absolutely can, but that's how it has to get done. Chiles can't be over 1 turnover. Maybe they can absorb the 1 and get by. Probably not 2, though, and of course you'd love to go 0, but at this point, what we've seen from them is just not probably a realistic expectation. And then they have to run the ball at just a serviceable level. I'm not asking them to go for 150, 200, anything like that. Just enough to keep the offense in character, in rhythm. And that was not there at all at Indiana. It was Iowa and Michigan, not against Oregon, a little bit against Ohio State. So it's just been hit and miss. Like I said, they popped up and rose up out of nowhere. Can they do something similar to that and just sort of keep everything on pace and on schedule? The whole deal really for this season, the defense has given them a lot of time to figure things out, and it's whether the offense does, right? The defense has played well enough, though, to keep them within reach, to keep them within games, give them the ball back, all those things. And then the offense has just taken a long time to find its footing. Or like I said, when it does, they'll score, they'll have a touchdown drive, a great 8-play, 75 yards, whatever, and then it'll be 3-and-out turnover. They're not stacking possessions together. So I think the run game could help with a lot of that. If they're able to do some of that stuff, I give them a good shot. But those would really be my keys: run defense, running the ball on offense, and probably can't be more than 1 turnover from Chiles.
Stephen, before I let you go, it wasn't a pretty game, but I want to ask you about Michigan State. Lost to Kansas last night in that Champions Classic. Now, Tom Izzo has been pretty stubborn here, not going to the transfer portal very much. Gets Fiddler this year, but where's this program at right now? Because it just felt like last year maybe they were 1 transfer big man away from being a really, really good Big Ten team. And you just wonder, like, how much more fight does Izzo have in him here? But that's the outsider look. So give me, you cover this program every day. Like, how do you view Michigan State basketball right now?
Yeah, I think Izzo still has the fight. Is he willing to fight in the ways that actually yield results, I guess is kind of the question. There's no doubt he still has the fire, the determination, the drive, all that stuff. He has not slowed down, but he's also so principled, in his approach. Is he going to go get the best players in the portal that he can? Is he just going to assemble enough talent? Let's say he has like 3 years left, probably. That's kind of how I operate. I don't think it'll be this year. Maybe it could be next year he's done. But let's say it's about 3. Is he going to get enough talent in that time to make another run? Because now, coming out of COVID, it was like, all right, everyone's kind of sort of rebooting and re-gearing. Now there's been enough time has passed. It's like you kind of have taken a step back as a program. It's not like just a little dip. It's like you've kind of moved down the ladder a little bit. I mean, you haven't been to a Final Four since pre-COVID. You've made 1 second weekend, since the pandemic. It's not really the same program right now. And so you're starting to feel some of that angst from fans. Absolutely. And it is a little uncomfortable because you do know the end is near for Izzo. You just don't know how close. And obviously he's beloved, but people also want to see him go out on top. They don't want to see a Mark D'Antonio sort of slow decline into just something lesser. And to be honest, that's kind of where we are right now. So he definitely has an opportunity and some time to get it back. But that's what people want to see. And I think that's a big question right now is, are you just going to be a good program, or are you still up at that elite level that you were for most of these 30 years. And what's it going to take to get back to that? This specific team is not going to be one, I don't think. Especially as we saw for at least the first half last night, that sort of restores that standard. I think we'll see. There are some promising things. I think it kind of looks more like a bubble team, though. Definitely a first weekend probably team to me if they were to make it. I do think the tournament streak's in jeopardy until I see a little more. But that's really the main thing is people want to see the program return to that elite standard, but they're not totally sure if Izzo's going to be willing to do all the things it takes to get there. Because, I mean, if he just called Matt Ishbia and said, I need $5 million for X player tomorrow, he would have it.
Right.
But will he do those things, because he cares about culture in his locker room and tradition, things like that. So that's kind of the state of things.
Yeah, no, I respect him so much. He's a great coach. One of my favorite guys to ask questions to whenever he comes to State Farm Center. And he's true to himself, but it feels like it's just getting in the way a little bit of, hey, you don't have to go full bore on this thing, but you just had one or two transfers. Like Michigan State maybe could have been in that Big Ten championship conversation. So good to hear about that from Stephen Brooks, Spartan Tailgate. Man, appreciate your time as always, Stephen. I'll see you Saturday at Memorial Stadium.
All right. Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.